Welcome to the Cube series. I was inspired to make these awesome cubes after seeing Crowline's amazing cube pins. They make such amazing art, make sure to check them out. Now I made this series for my first ever art show, along with a bunch of other amazing artists for Strange Cat Toys, and it was so much fun. But everything needed to be small, under 2 inches. And I'm going to make a matching grublet that matches each design and theme. So our ghost cube is going to start off a lot like our mushroom cube, the first cube in my cube series. We're going to want these cool layers of dirt and rock. I'm using different colors of polymer clay, mixing them together to get some cool custom colors. Now we're going to start wrapping our cube in clay. You're going to want to use an acrylic roller to flatten out your pieces of clay, and you want them to be an even thickness. Here I'm cutting out a strip. This is going to go around the cube, and this part is for the bottom. I'm going to use my liquid clay adhesive. This is going to help the polymer clay stick to your wood really well. You just want a nice thin layer over the surface, and when you add your clay, you want to make sure no air bubbles get stuck between the clay and the wood, or that can cause issues when you go to bake it. Now I don't want the bottom layer to be huge, so I'm just doing a little strip along the bottom. You can make your layers whatever size you want, whatever shape you want. Now that I have the bottom layer clay attached to my wood, I'm going to blend everything together, and I'm going to use my razor to get everything straight. I'm a perfectionist. You can leave yours more organic and bumpy looking. Here I didn't blend my 2 clays together all the way so I could get this cool marbling effect, and it looks really neat. Use my liquid clay adhesive, and then it's just about repeating the pattern and making sure everything is blended together really well. I'm sculpting on a hard glass mat, so I like to use that to keep everything square and in line. I push the clay around to make more dips in the clay so it looks a little more natural and not so straight. Then I just use my razor blade to cut off any excess at the top if you have any. We're going to need to make room for a grass layer later. Here you can see I've moved the clay around to get the bumps and ridges I want, and now it's time to make some rocks. All you want to do is make some rock shapes in all your different colors, bake them first, and then you can push them right into the clay. Then I like to use a toothbrush to texture the clay. Now I want to make a tiny skeleton to go in our dirt layers. The only glow clay that I had was Cosclay. I will admit it is not the easiest to use. It is a lot softer than their usual clays, but I made it work. I added some glow powder into this clay to make it have even more of a glow. Now it's really hard to show you what I'm doing here because I'm working on white clay, which is not the easiest to see, so I'm sorry about that. But here you can just see I'm forming out a tiny skeleton and really using my tools to help me. Since the clay was sticky, I was struggling quite a bit, but I did manage to get the whole thing done. Did I say a lot of curse words? Yes, I did. Now, for our little skeleton, we're going to put it in the dirt. Do we know what happened to this guy? We don't. That's up to you. You can make up the lore of how this poor soul got under the ground and made a radioactive ghost. But here I'm just taking the clay adhesive and dipping each piece in, and I'm feeling very much like I'm playing Operation right now. I feel like my childhood experiences are coming back to help me in this moment. And I'm pushing them into the clay really well so they don't fall out. And you can position your skeleton however you want. And I'm just going back over with my texture of my toothbrush. And then I baked it, but not long enough and not correctly, and this is what happens when you mess with your clay after not baking it long enough. It crumbled into pieces, and I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna start over or am I gonna work with it? And that's where I got a very good idea. So I decided I was gonna salvage it. I was gonna work with these cracks and make it into something extra cool. And I'm really glad this happened because this idea was way better than my first one. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the larger pieces and just gluing them to the block with super glue. Then, I know it doesn't make sense, I added more damage in the places that I wanted because I needed space for a few special features. Look at me, I'm just tearing this poor thing apart. Don't worry, we're gonna fix it. Now you can see what we're working with. So the first thing we need to make is this cool little radioactive drum. Do they actually store radioactive stuff in these yellow drums? Who knows? But they're fun to make and they look cool. We're starting off with a yellow clay cylinder and then cutting it in half. because we're only going to have half of our barrel sticking out. I added 2 strips of clay to the top and the bottom, and then I'm blending them into the body of the barrel. Then we're going to punch out a lid for the top. After we've got the top, we're going to add the hole. Then I'm adding a little bit of lines and texture to the top and bottom. Then brushing the whole thing in a little bit of alcohol, and you can see it fits perfect. But of course we need our radioactive symbol. Painting this on was hard, and I messed up once, but I just used some alcohol to remove it and tried again. Then I'm using some Bacon Bond to get it stuck. Then we're going to add clay around it so it looks like it was supposed to be there. Here I'm using all my different colored clays and patching things back up. And of course adding texture, and you can't even tell any damage was there. You can also use some liquid clay to put your pieces back together, and more texturing, like it never happened. Now I wanted to add a fun little tentacle to one side of this cube, and it's fairly easy to make. Then you just want to squeeze it in your little crack and position it however you want. Now with any radioactive disaster, of course we're going to need some green goo. So I'm using some resin tint, some liquid clay adhesive, and some glow powder and mixing it all together. And it makes the most perfect radioactive green ever. I'm just going to use my needle tool to get it into all the areas I want, all the cracks and crevices. Now I'm going to flash cure this using a heat gun, and that's just going to make sure that the liquid adhesive doesn't run while I'm trying to do the rest of the cube. But I'm going to need to bake it to fully cure it as well. Here you can really take your time and have fun. I put some on the skull as well to give it a little extra detail. I noticed that the bones were a little too white, so I watered down some brown paint and went over the skeleton, and it gave it a nice aged look. Now it's time to make some grass for our very top layer of this cube. Well, other than the ghost. I wanted this to have a little bit of a video game vibe to it, so I wanted the grass to hang over the side a little bit. Make sure you give yourself enough room to go over the side, and then I shaped it really nicely and got it nice and smooth. Then I went ahead and drilled a hole in the top. I want to place a metal armature for our ghost. We're going to slip him onto this later so it looks like he's floating. Speaking of ghosts, it's time to make our little ghosty. Now he starts off in this teardrop shape. I'm just working out the tail and giving it a little bit of a bump. This is going to add a little movement to our ghost so it looks like he's just floating above our cube. Now once you have an overall ghost body shape that you like, we can move on to the eyes. I'm going to be using a dotting tool, and I rock it in the hole so it makes an oval shape instead of just a circle. Then I'm using a smaller dotting tool to mark out where I want the mouth, then going back in after I like it and carving it out. I'm going to use a needle tool to mark out where our armature wire is going to end up going. It's also going to allow me to place it on a larger needle tool so I can continue working on this little guy and baking him without squishing anything. Here I'm going to add some rocks and details to our grass. And I'm also going to hollow out an area so that I can add some tiny little artificial grass after baking. Now after baking, we're going to test fit, make sure that he fits on our armature, everything's looking good, but our ghost needs some little arms. So I'm taking 2 equal parts of clay and just making them into 2 tiny little arms. You want to blend them into the body really well so they look like they belong there and are just slapped on the side. Now after I have my arms blended in really well, I'm going to use some Cosclay softening agent, which is like clay softener for Sculpey, but this is just for Cosclay. So I go ahead and put that on, that helps blend the arms in, and after baking, it's time to add the eyes. A little black paint does wonders for this little guy's personality, doesn't it? Isn't he the cutest? Now it's time to add our 2 different types of grasses. So we're going to add some Mod Podge, some matte Mod Podge, over all the green areas and then sprinkle this stuff on. You may have to do multiple layers to make sure everything's covered as well as you'd like it. I want to make sure I put a lot by the stem of where we're going to attach our ghost so you don't see it. After everything's on there and dried, I like to mix some of this Mod Podge with water, mix it together, and then I put it over the top of the grass. This hardens it and stops it from flaking off. Then we need to gloss up our tentacle to make it extra gross, and I decide to gloss up all of our ooze as well. Now for our little tuft of grass, we're just adding some E6000 and using some tweezers and a needle tool to get it down in the area I made for it. Then we're going to add some glue to our armature for our ghost, and you can see I just made that 2-inch limit. Thank you so much for hanging out with me while I made the last cube in my cube series. Unless you guys want to see more, let me know in the comments. Now you can see how it glows. It looks really cool, and I also made a matching radioactive grublet to go with this guy. And if you love art tutorials or watching art videos, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.